Welcome everyone once again to a very exciting panel interview discussion. In order for organizations to achieve their mission and strategy, it is essential to align the structures, processes, people, leadership, practices, culture, and metrics of an organization accordingly. The COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with the fourth industrial revolution, has forced organizations to rethink their strategy and ways of working. Today, we are joined by 4 HR experts from diverse HR backgrounds within the consulting and corporate space who will share their insights with us on curating the right organizational design for your business in the new world of work. Zwane is the founder and CEO of Breakthrough Development, one of our speakers today. Dr. Gule, CEO of the Institute of People Management. Tshidi, Khunou, Head of Talent Acquisition at F&B Wealth and Investments. And Brigitte Chetty, Group Professional Services Executive for Blue Label Telecoms. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Our first question and first up is Buyani. Buyani, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on HR and how we manage change within organizations. At some point, organizations will need to move from survival mode to adaptation. What are some of the factors that would shape the post-coronavirus HR landscape and working environment in order to ensure that organizations are not merely surviving, but adapting effectively to this new world of work? Over to you, Buyani.
Well, Dirisha, thank you very much, and greetings to everybody who is part of our summit. The joy around being engaged as we are in the month of September, a time of new beginnings and a time of new spring, we are afforded the chance to be able to look back, be in the current, and look into the future. And what is really interesting for me from a human capital and human resources perspective is that we have, as a result of COVID-19, been afforded the opportunity to look back and see the things that we have gone through and appreciate that what brought us here definitely will not take us to where we need to go to. We get to be able to have an opportunity to reflect on what has worked and what has not worked. And of course, the question that you're asking us is to be able to look into how we get to be able to move to adaptation. Indeed, we know for a fact that Darwin presented a story which was to be able to say that it is not the fastest that survive in the species, but the ones that adapt the best. I think what is coming through for us in relation to what COVID-19 has presented is the realization that human resources management and human capital development is an infinite game that we're involved in. And we are in charge of businesses that are going to be outliving us. And if we do not pay attention to what it is that will grow the organization beyond ourselves, we will find ourselves restricted in terms of whether we actually have the right recovery before we can talk to thriving. So for me, there are at least 3 stages. One is seeking to be able to survive. We know for a fact that well over 300,000 small businesses, middle-sized businesses, and some big businesses have had to fold as a result of COVID-19. We know in the US, for instance, many iconic businesses have folded. Right here at home, the same has taken place. What that has done is that it has brought into our immediate understanding that the concept that we've been carrying on over the last 13 years, which has been about VUCA and volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, has come home to our places. It has come home in the sense that now we're dealing with human capital that are at a personal level dealing with volatility as a result of working at home, as a result of not being called on as frequently as they need to be. We are dealing with issues of uncertainty around what my career is going to look like when I go back into physically being in the same workspace I used to be in. And of course, uncertainty around the fact that I may very well need to be able to learn to work away from the physical place that I used to be working in. But there is also a very critical area which has to do with the complexity that is brought through with the necessity for technology to be at the fore and something that I celebrate, work with, and become friends with. That in itself brings out the notion and the understanding that what has been happening with us working from home is the need to be able to get the collaboration and co-creation of at least 4, if not 5 generations in the workplace at this moment. We are dealing, among others, with the introduction into a workplace which began as the turning of the year 2020 came through, when many of the Generation Zs got into the workplace. And as they got into the workplace, we were thinking about allocating them there as learners or in learnerships. But also some were coming in as graduates in training. And as they stepped into the workplace, here are people who have grown up with technology. And as far as they're concerned, this is the oyster that they've been wanting to be able to enjoy in the world. But what they are finding is that many of the supervisors they have are millennials whose experience has been one that has been about navigating technology, but also creating entrepreneurial thinking in the workplace. But also, what we're also realizing is that they are seniors and who many of them are preparing to be able to go into the sunset of their careers are Gen Xers. And the Gen Xers are people who have grown up in an environment where things needed to be done, but cautiously. They've had to be able to adopt caution because of the appreciation of what had happened in the generation before them. While many organizations were given shape, they now have had to be able to bring balance. The language of work-life balance comes through to the fore. So when we're looking into the complexity that COVID-19 has brought into the workplace, among others, it has been that we can have all of the expertise that is carried throughout, utilize that diversity, and ensure inclusion. Distinguish ourselves from fear to trust, from I don't know what I'm doing to I love this organization. And as leaders, what is coming through is the necessity to lead for excellence all the time and grow the enterprise so that it is much better than it was when COVID started. Thank you very much, Tshidi.
Wow, that's really insightful, Buyani. Thanks for sharing those insights. You've touched on some very critical points around working with fear, working with uncertainty. And, you know, just a question on the topic of fear. I mean, it's quite prevalent with working from home, remote working, that people have a lot of fear and uncertainty around what is expected, around, ways of working, etc. How do you foresee we move from a place of being fearful to a place of trusting?
In itself, it calls on us as leaders to be able to demonstrate that that which we invited people into the workplace to be able to do is something that is still necessary going into the future. So core skills, competency, and then the wisdom that they each carry is what is going to be needed the most. But as leaders, we need to be able to adopt, as it were, a 4-step process, as it were. It's one that says, focus on the individual, focus on what it is that they can do, listen to their concerns. Because when you listen to their concerns, they will be able to share and allow themselves to be vulnerable to you. But then it's important to be able to involve. When people are involved in the solution finding and the creation towards implementation, they will own it. And finally, it's about personalizing. Personalizing is saying, this is my organization. what I do here allows me a chance to create a legacy and be a legend. So short form, flip. If we adopt a flip mentality, we are going to be able to achieve a lot more with the people that we lead, and those we lead will become future leaders because of what they have learned in observing us lead them better.
That's excellent, Buyani. And, what I'm hearing from your insight shared is definitely there's a focus on being more human again, being able to connect with people on an emotional level, being able to support people, bringing back, I guess, the human capital. Thanks for sharing those insights, because I think that is definitely got to be our focus going into the future. There's one more question I want to ask around identity and belonging, and maybe I can open this maybe to the rest of the panel. So identity and belonging is definitely becoming important, and as humans, we need social interaction to grow, to learn, to stay engaged. And there's definitely a growing urge to reconnect with colleagues and associates, both socially and in the context of day-to-day working activity. How do you foresee this happening in the context of remote working, where people are becoming frustrated that they aren't able to connect with their colleagues as much as they used to in a normal office setup?
Well, I can chip in there, Teresa. I think what we should be doing, because connection or belonging is so important. And as we are working away from each other at this stage, organizations must just ensure that they create opportunities for people to come together, to connect, come together how we use technology. I mean, what this new situation has showed us is the importance of that. Most people would have, and these professionals would have cell phones. And I think it's just to use that technology to be able, the capacity of the technology to be able to connect the teams. Have a regular, predictable times when you can bring your teams together to chat, and not to chat about work, sometimes just to chat as people, to connect as people, to say, how is it going? As Buyani has pointed out, that's the role of leadership, is to be able to create those connections. And I think that's what we need to do.
I think that's vitally important. Yeah, I mean, I hear of companies actually doing things like virtual pizza lunches, and, they make sure they deliver a pizza at each of the employees' home, and then they get on to a virtual connect session, and they have a lunch session together, and they get to connect and network. And I think, doing things like that especially helps people to bring in that human element, that need, that sense of belonging and that need to interact. And I think it fulfills our needs as humans. So that's so relevant. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Gule.
Thank you.
It's probably useful to be able to say on the issue of identity, as leaders, we help a great deal in restoring people's sense of identity, sense of belonging. So if every now and again, we also call in to be able to reinforce how what people do adds value inside the organization. They then see themselves as wanting to be able to prove to us that they are as valuable as we point out. So it is vital for us to be able to seek out ways in which we are speaking truth, but more importantly, speaking value to what people are doing in the organization. And if we can tell them how what they do has added something to the final, in the value chain, to what our customers are getting, they're most likely to want to do more. And to that effect, we get the engagement levels raised inside the organization.
Critical point that you're sharing, Buyani. And I think it seems, as we get further into the discussion, there seems to be so much more emphasis on leadership, really showing up as being more supportive, more engaging. Because I guess at the end of the day, leadership drives culture, right? And I think that element of leadership empowerment is so vitally important. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
So Dr. Gule, Leadership is the glue that holds organizations together. It is said that the new world of work will increasingly require a different type of leader. Is this true, and why?
This is so true. And Buyani has already indicated the importance of leadership in his remarks. And I just want to add or build on what Buyani has said, that we definitely need our leaders to step up, step down, step sideways, to embrace the people. The key thing here is that as leaders, we, in a time like this when there is hopelessness or people may be feeling hopeless, we've had incidents and reports of really unfortunate situations happening, people giving up hope. Someone wrote and said that a leader is a spreader, someone who gives hope to people where there is hopelessness. So there is that we need our leaders to be able to do. To, in a situation like this, a situation where there is a lot of hopelessness, to actually be human enough to breathe that hope. They may not be feeling that strong themselves, but it's still the duty that they have. And this is where being coached as a leader, having someone that you can talk to becomes very, very important, because you also need input. You are human, isn't it? But you must also show up as human to the teams, because remember, the people that you lead as a leader actually would love to even give you a hug as a leader. Of course, now we don't give hugs. We only do this, right, because of the coronavirus. But we can be creative around how we support each other as leaders, be part of a leadership circle that you can share your ideas with. So my view is that if you are going to hold things together, hold yourself together as a leader, first you must understand where you are, be honest with how you feel as a leader, what's happening inside you, and be able to reach out. This idea that, I mean, this vision that we've had of leaders, that they are infallible, they cannot ever show their vulnerability, I think that has been blown out of the water completely, because we're all faced with a new situation. And these situations require, as I say, the first thing is that we just must be authentic. We must be who you are. We can no longer pretend, because we live in a world that we are all finding out, but we still have to lead. All right. So the leader in a situation of hopelessness must show the faith that they have, what holds the strength that they have, but reach out, the humanity, the being human that you referred to earlier, that they are human and they need support. And when you need that support, actually shout. I had a story of a board that realized that their leader in their organization, who was critical, was going into burnout. And they had to intervene and say, this is the time for you as our leader to take a sabbatical, to go away and reflect and grow yourself. Because the other thing that we don't do as leaders, and that's why sometimes we just kilter over and we die out of things that should not be killing us, is because we are not listening to our own bodies. So a leader must know himself, right? So the so-called EQ, emotional intelligence, they understand what's going on around them. And this is a stressful time for everyone. We all need support. And the people that work for us are not our enemies. We can reach out to them and embrace them. They will embrace us. So I'm just calling for our leaders that what is needed to be that glue is that we need to be really human. We need to know that that's who we are. And we need to bring that forward. I can see my colleague wants to add to this point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is also the time where we need to also identify what we think leadership is. I think one of the biggest mistakes corporate always makes is they'll get the best performing individual, put them in a role and say, you're now going to be people leader. Like Dr. J was saying, it is now time where leaders need to step in and actually show some sense of leadership and that vulnerability that comes in. But if you've taken somebody who's actually a true specialist, understands how to get the results, understands how to get the sales, you then put that person into a role and say, please go duplicate who you are with the team that you're now going to be leading. Unfortunately, during COVID, the lack of the humanness of that individual normally gets to show its true colors, because they get frustrated with the fact that, number one, they're not able to see the people individually doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. Number two, those people are not necessarily doing things the way they're supposed to do. Now, you then have a situation where you've taken the wrong person who, yes, should be a leader in their own right as a specialist. You've now put them in a role where we now say to them, go lead a group of people. That becomes the most dangerous thing that you can ever do, because they forget how to become human when times are like this, when the sales are not coming in, the money's not coming in. They forget that aspect. So I think the biggest role we need to sometimes play in the human capital space is to ensure that who we appoint as a leader has actually the leadership qualities, not necessarily the sales qualities, because there's too many mistakes where we take these guys and say to them, go and lead these people. And then they end up, number one, burning out themselves because they want to carry the team. And secondly, they end up making the team burn out. So those are some of the key things that I think we need to always remember.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Dr. Gule and Tshidi. Certainly, I mean, we can see that leaders need to be able to lead in an ambiguous and a complex environment. Dr. Gule, you alluded to the fact around showing your vulnerabilities, being human, getting down to grassroots level, truly connecting and engaging with your employees. I think that's needed more than ever before. Tshidi, you alluded to the fact of choosing the right personality for leadership, which I think is so fundamentally important, because not everybody is actually cut out to be a leader. It takes a certain caliber of person to be able to lead with those kind of qualities that you're describing. The question I have for the panel is around flexibility in applying one's leadership approach. With the remote working and, with it being so different from working in an office setup, surely leadership needs to apply some level of flexibility in terms of how they manage employees. What are your thoughts on this?
I saw Buyani wanted to come through before me, so I'll let him do that.
Thank you very much. I think it's important, Risha, to be able to just take note of the fact that not everybody is a leader, but many are placed in positions of leadership. And when people look into leadership as a position, what they end up doing is to rely on competency instead of looking into their own character. Competence will take you to the position, but character will keep you there or lift you further. And what becomes important for us to be able to understand in this space, particularly when we've gone through the changes that we've gone through, if nothing else, COVID is pretty much like the crisis that reveals leaders, not so much the people who are pretenders. And so many have been so used to managing that they don't quite know what to do now. And the earlier conversation was about the issue of culture. The culture that we've built up, particularly in the last 20 years, has been one of, we want to be able to have high performance, but part of the high performance is how often I am seen in the office, the showing up in the office. And I need to be able to do more hours than everybody else. And we are in competition. What this is bringing through to us is the need to co-create and collaborate. And if nothing else, we are going to be able to get to greater heights. And in fact, we will scale through the shortcomings of COVID that have been brought through to us. Because every now and again, we'll come to appreciate, Derosha, that change is either brought onto us or we create the change. This time around, it has been brought onto us. Just like happens with an egg, if it's cracked from outside, things die. But if it's cracked from inside, life begins. So leaders need to be the ones who are creating the cracking of the egg from inside. That is, they create the right culture where people feel nurtured to be themselves, give themselves fully, and more importantly, that they can be vulnerable to their leaders. And their leaders are not going to be able to take that as a weakness, but as being human and allowing them to be able to speak to areas of personal development and organizational development. These are things that we don't really pay much attention to. The joy of doing this session just after we've had the celebration of women is that we are beginning to appreciate the importance of caring in the workplace. We've gone through situations where we don't have to like one another, we just have to work here. Now that came through from someone whose mother did not love them. The truth is, the workplace is where love must be experienced. And we need to create a culture of loving the people we are with, because we spend 1/3 of our life with the people at work. That's the culture we need to create.
Wow, Buyani, that is incredible. The workplace is where love must be experienced.
Absolutely.
Wow, that really, really sounds amazing. And that is exactly what's needed, right? Because employees are going through so much. I mean, there's so much of change that's happening in the working environment. There's technological advancement with the COVID-19. We're surrounded by so much of death. People are losing their jobs. There is anxiety, there's fear, there's so much that people are dealing with. So really, compassion. And really being there for your employees in this time of need is really what needs to be the focus. So these are very interesting discussions, so insightful. I mean, it just goes to show how important the role of leadership really is in organizations in terms of how they show up, the support that they provide, and how they're coming across. So vitally important. So thank you so much for sharing those insights. Really incredible discussion.
Absolutely.
Tshidi, how do we define talent in the changing world? And what are some of the challenges we may need to consider? And how do we enable this talent to perform consistently at its peak?
So I think the time we're in has been one of the best times, because what it's done is it's accelerating the way in which we look at talent. It's accelerating the way in which we look at performance. And it's also making us starting to look at what we would usually call the key performance indicators, or KPIs. Now, back in the days, you'll find that a lot of the KPIs that people used to speak about were based on physically how well people interact with each other. You know, some of the people would be marked on, you know, are you a sociable person? How do you interact with everybody else in the office? Whereas the times that we're in, unfortunately, is now our interactions are virtual. And it's about, do I have a quick chat with you on Microsoft Teams or on Zoom or whichever one I've got? And that's how we now measure people's performance. So now, when we actually talk about identifying talent, it's about being able to say, as a business or as a company, we first need to take a step back for each and every single one of the areas that we look at, is to say, what is it that we consider to be a key performance indicator for anybody that's doing work? Because gone are the days where we used to first start coming up with these key performance indicators that we give to teams 6 months in advance and say, for the next 6 months, this is what performance looks like. And then the people go and work and work and work and work. 6 months later, we come back and do a review and we say, how have we done in the last 6 months? What COVID has now forced us to do is to actually be a bit more agile, is to say, there has to be specific outcomes that we want from a performance point of view. Identify those outcomes. And once we've identified the outcomes, we then are able to make sure that from a measurable point of view, we identify that for the teams that are actually there and that are supposed to be performing the job. Once you have done that, it becomes a lot easier for you as a business to then say, if we now say these are people who are considered to be talent, are we now considering them to be talent because the output of the work that we're seeing at the end of every week or at the end of every month or at the end of every 6 months is the output in relation to what they're supposed to do? Is it not about being able to influence people individually because they see them face to face? Or is it one of those where we now look at these people to say, based on purely the output, how do we then measure you and say you are a top performer? We also now need to also reflect to say, when we talk about agility in a work environment, what exactly does agile mean when we talk about identifying talent? Because what could have been identified as great talent back in the days was based on whether it was an extroverted individual that's able to be out there and be seen by the world. We now have to now take a step back and say, but even the most introverted people are able to bring in the same type of outputs that another person that was out there is also able to do. you then start learning to actually reward the certain behaviors and certain outputs that you then get. Because it's no longer about how much do I see this person interacting with the people. It's now about how much of the output that this individual has got that they actually are able to do. And also part of that you then need to do is that the check-ins from a leadership point of view, where the leader needs to take a step in and actually check in with the team and check in with our mental health and understand how they're doing from a mental point of view, then becomes even more critical, because you'll find that for a lot of us, I mean, even most of you guys, you never really switch off. Since this virtual world we've lived in, we never get to switch off. And you'll find that the top performers don't know how to switch off, because every moment they want to open the laptop, they've got the emails on their cell phone, they've got the emails on their iPad, they've got emails on every single thing that they've got. Even on weekends, they're still checking them. And it's about being able to sometimes step in as a leader and say, because you know the output is actually brilliant, and you know how much work needs to be put in for the output to come out, you need to check in from a mental health point of view and assist the individuals to also learn to take a step back, to also learn to switch off and take a step out of the environment that we're then in. Once you've done all these things and you've identified what great talent and what performance is, you then as a company start using that as a matrix to then say, going forward, it's not about how well we give you the matrix 6 months in advance, but it's about being able to say, what we've now given you over a period of time, whether it's over a month or whether it's over every 2 weeks, the output that you then deliver to the company is basically what we then measure. In that instance, it's no longer about at the end of the financial year where we now speak to you and say, your rating is the following. Because what companies tend to do a lot is they tend to focus a lot of their performance on a rating. Ratings are very biased. Ratings are based on what sometimes how the leader has experienced. In this instance, unfortunately, in most cases, you can't really experience each other as we would normally do in an office environment. So you need to now start saying, besides experiencing you as an individual that now I get to see or interact with daily, how am I experiencing your output and how are you adding value to the team, whether it's through a virtual connection, and how well do we influence those people? So I think for me, when it comes to talent and identifying talent in the world that we live in, those are some of the key things companies need to really put that energy and focus on. Because once we have done that, I promise you, the way we do things is now going to change, and we'll be able to actually deliver better for the organization.
Well, that's great insights, Tshidi. Thanks for sharing that. Are you suggesting that we start challenging the traditional performance management approach in terms of the performance ratings that we normally allocate to employees? I mean, are you suggesting that we may need to start thinking about looking at that a little differently in terms of how we manage our talent?
I think it is time. I think it served its purpose for a period of time. I think it did amazing things at the time that we wanted it to do. But unfortunately, we're at a time where the performance matrix that we've used before in the past are no longer now applicable in today's times, because the time has changed. And I think that's one of those things. I think Buyani mentioned earlier to say, if you don't adapt to the changes that are coming, unfortunately, a lot of companies will leave you behind. So many companies now have actually even gone to an extent where they themselves have now gotten rid of their number rating, where they no longer say your rating is a 5 or your rating is a 3 or your rating is this. It is now a qualitative rating, which now speaks about the fact that the person's output can easily be measured by another person. And where we now go wrong when it comes to the current ratings is that if the 5 of us are both leaders in the same company, and you then look at how each one of us is rated an individual's performance, 90% of the time we'll not give each person the exact same rating. That for me says it is too biased and it's too based on my views as an individual. So there's nothing qualitative about that. It's more quantitative. The best rating or the performance matrix that we should all be using is one where if I give it to Brigitte and say, Brigitte, this is based on how I've seen and experienced this individual and our performance. The rating between myself and Brigitte should not be too far apart from what we think about that person. But now, if you look at the ratings that we've got, it's just such a number to a point where Brigitte might give that person a 1, I might give the person a 6 or a 5. But then, for me, then says that's qualitative. I mean, that's too much quantitative and not based on the quality of the output of the individual. In my absence, you should be able to measure somebody's performance, and the ratings should be technically around the same, or the performance should be technically around the same. So that's why I'm saying the way we do performance ratings, these numbers that we're doing, we need to honestly, and for us as HR, human capital leaders, we need to start challenging that, because we've been so comfortable living with the old way of measuring people's performance that we're no longer evolving and bringing new ways of actually looking at people's performance. It's time to start looking at it and start driving that to say, what exactly is performance? Is it a number, or is it actually a conversational thing that we have over a period of time?
This is absolutely interesting, Tshidi, because generally with your performance management discussions and how performance ratings are allocated, usually in organizations, they've already predefined the percentage of people who will acquire a certain rating. And now you as a leader are forced to make sure that you align to those numbers. So I hear you completely, moving from being quantitative to being more qualitative in terms of our approach. And I think that's absolutely needed. Certainly, the performance, the way in which performance has been handled in the past definitely needs to be shifted if we are to actually move forward and stay relevant. A question that I have for you is that many leading businesses are realizing that they cannot hire all the new skills they need. How do you foresee addressing this challenge? Well, any other member of the panel can answer the question as well if they wish to.
Maybe Buyani wanted to say something before I say something, or Brigitte.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, what I wanted to just touch on a very critical factor, which was presented so beautifully by Chetty, which looks into our performance management process. And going back to my reference back to creating a culture wherein love is experienced, because if I really and truly care about the people that I've got, the next thing I would want to be able to do is to equip them to get to the point where they can excel, not just do the basic and the normal. You see, we often speak about the normal bell curve. There is no excellence that comes with the bell curve. What brings out excellence is when we shift everybody towards exceeding their job requirements, their position requirements, when we actually help them to be able to look into the key outcomes we want to achieve, but more importantly, the impact of what they do. Because when people have a sense of how what they do is going to be able to positively impact the next person, the organization, but also when we do our stakeholder analysis exercise, we begin to appreciate that business is not operating in a vacuum. It's operating in a space where there are others. Therefore, when somebody knows that they've been delivering exceptionally well at work, when they go back to their community, they are so well received and they are able to transfer the skills. Now, what's happening in that is that the organization's brand is being carried forward. Isn't it that what we're looking for? Where our own staff become brand ambassadors? My sense is that there's a necessity for us to truly create this environment of love. Because when we've got that, we will care about what it is we afford our staff to do. When we afford them a place to be able to excel and thrive, the company, the organization, the institution also will thrive. We need to create that.
That's brilliantly put, Buyani. And just to add to that, what I'm hearing you say, coming out of the discussions is that people also need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, right? There needs to be purpose behind what they're doing, because if there's purpose behind their jobs, they're a lot more passionate towards it. They are able to show the commitment. And I think it's important, as you say, for them to also be very cognizant of the impact of their input. That is important. So definitely purpose, impact, and everything you're saying really does make tremendous sense. So back to my question. Do you feel that it's best to many leading businesses are realizing that they cannot hire all the new skills they need. How do you foresee addressing this challenge? to members of the panel?
Like
Well,
to unpack
I'll
that a
allow
little bit.
Brigitte to come in before me. I see a hand has been up. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So I think, Tshidi has touched on a lot of points that are critical post-COVID. And one of the things for me is that we are moving towards a digital roadmap. And tech talent has been increasingly difficult to source during this time. Talent in general. And, when I say that, people often look at me and say, but unemployment rates have increased.
Brigitte, can I just ask you to speak a little louder?
Sure, no problem. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I think one of the things that we need to consider is that the employee experience is so critical at this stage. And from the interview stage right up until the induction and onboarding stage, which we have not always catered for, and I think we've just allowed for the fact that there is face-to-face interaction. In terms of scarce skills, while there will forever be, challenges in sourcing the right people at the right time, one of the things that we can do is look at development. I think all my fellow panel speakers have raised the fact that development is so key. We have focused this on leadership development, but it is so important that during this time that we look at ways in which to build the skill. With organizations rapidly changing, it's important for us to make sure that we are building those capabilities and not just sourcing them externally. Because the reality of it is that a lot of the capabilities and skills that we're looking for currently may not exist, or may not exist to the extent that we need them to exist. So definitely from a development perspective, I think that is the future of us building skills, not just internally, but also building skills to support the country's growth.
You're definitely spot on, because there's a range of new job roles that are starting to emerge as a result of the fourth industrial revolution, and skills which we don't have currently. So absolutely correct in saying we need to be able to build those capabilities internally, because it's actually best to work with our talent internally, right? Instead of starting the process from scratch around building the relevant kind of capabilities that would be required to align to the future of work and the new roles that are starting to emerge. Thanks so much for sharing those insights, Brigitte. Dr. Gule, you did have something to say.
Yes, I just want to add that we may not have all the talent within our own organizations, but we have to also to realize that we, as it was said earlier, we don't work in a vacuum. We're part of an ecosystem. We can have talent that we can source from other sources. We have freelancers now, people who just say, what project do you have? I'm going to come in, I have the skills, I'll deliver this project. It's more around what are the outcomes that you want. And you can get the skills from outside if you don't have them in your organization. Give them the work that needs to be done, but be clear what it is that you want so that you can measure the performance on the delivery. So I think part of what Tshidi was talking about in terms of performance management, ratings and all that, and I think we're moving into more rapid assessment of performance, almost on an hourly, daily basis. And we can use the same tools we're talking about today to have teams rate how their colleagues are doing. And here's the output that you wanted, here's the quality, and people all agree. Listen, this is great work, let's go. And the rating is done instead of waiting until the end of the year to do that.
That's excellent, Dr. Gule. And I think what you also did mention is leveraging the changing workforce to actually draw talent from there. So really what you're referring to is a gig economy, right? Our pool of freelancers and independent contractors that we could also leverage these kind of skills from to build the kind of capabilities that organizations will need, right? Because the workforce is changing, right? And we are starting to see the emergence of this gig economy. And then, of course, we've got the multiple generations. So, leveraging skills as well across these different multiple generations would really make for a very interesting discussion and analysis that organizations can actually take forward. All very interesting, very, very, very insightful information. I think organizations have so much to think about, to think differently around how to show up more creatively and more meaningfully. So Brigitte, there is no doubt that working from home has shattered hierarchies and challenged our understanding on how to exercise levels of authority, coordinate teams, and supervise employees. What are some of the processes and structures that we may need to consider to ensure the effective management of employees within this new scenario?
Thank you so much for the question, Darusha. I think we've been on this journey for the last 5 years, talking about how the way of working needs to change, and COVID has just put a rapid change on this, and we've had no choice but to actually make this change. And so it's so important to understand that the reality of the situation is that we need to go back and understand what is the purpose of the organization, what are those strategic objectives, and start from that stage. Often we're looking at smaller processes to navigate how we manage performance, and like we've just spoken, how we source talent, how we communicate. But the reality is to redefine why we're doing what we're doing. And by starting there, we're able to identify what it is that we're doing, how we want to do it, and then build the structure from there. A lot of organizations remain in a functional structure, very traditional operating models, and it's the rung on the ladder that I need to climb. And moving away from that approach towards developing talent and towards actually co-creating this organization that is going to achieve high performance is looking at organizations that are scalable, operating models that are flexible and agile, that are going to be able to actually give us the return and have the development as part of that structure. I think scalability and flexibility is at the forefront of organizations at this point, being able to adapt to scenarios. And I watched as we went from a hard lockdown and we actually, eased into lockdown. Organizations still struggled as, do I let my workforce return to the office? Don't I let them return? What happens if we move to a higher level or back into hard lockdown? What do we do? And so that gives rise to making sure that your operating model is scalable and flexible to be able to cater for those things. What is so critical is that throughout all those processes and structures, your culture underpins that. And taking into consideration that what is it that, Dr. Gule actually brought up something that was so critical around communication. Now more than ever, making sure that the organization is able to leverage those systems, the virtual ways in which we can connect with each other. The reality is that we don't know how much longer we're going to embark on the way we are working at the moment. What most organizations are finding is that employees have become more productive. Yes, we then move into, and we can, this is a lengthy topic, right? We can move into well-being and work-life balance. The reality is that I don't think any organization is going to have this in place fully. It's about being able to be scalable. It's about being able to be adaptable. It's about being able to understand what the customer needs are and how to cater for your customers' needs. And that is how you need to center it. I really believe that people are wanting to connect, and I really believe that organizations are redefining what their purpose is. And for the first time in a very long time, organizations are understanding that employees are first, and using the ways in which they communicate to leverage that. Because previously it was easier to just walk into the office and say, we're changing this process. Now it's not as easy to do that. Now it's actually understanding what is the outcome from what we want to achieve. And change management, I think, is critical in this process. So moving from any structure, whether it be a product-based structure or a functional structure, it's critical to understand that your employees are struggling to adapt to this. And the change management and how you help them transition into the way that you are expecting them to work is critical at this point. Be it the slightest change from a pre-boarding or an onboarding process to actually delivering on the job or dealing with a customer. It's all new, and I think the change management processes that we take and embark on are going to be critical to the success of us transitioning to those models.
So thank you everybody for joining the session. I hope it was really enlightening. We've really got to hear from amazing HR experts, and I hope that we can take their knowledge and the insights with us back to the workplace and apply some of these learnings to the working environment. So goodbye for now. We will join, you will get to speak to our panel of experts during the next Q&A session. Thank you so much for joining. See you soon.
Yes.